На трибунах аллеют знамена, облака в поднебесье плывут. На зеленом ковре стадиона разноцветные майки цветут.
Hello and welcome back to the RFN podcast. For those who celebrate, I hope you enjoyed your Easter. Over the weekend, the RPL also returned with a bang. We were treated 24 goals, 2 managerial resignations, and 1 new man in at Krasnodar. Since then, there's been the Cup of Russia quarterfinals, and Javier Ribalta has left Zenit. To discuss all of this, I'm joined as usual by the dulcet tones of David Sanson.
Cheers, James. Thanks for that. Good evening.
And our special guest, the voice of Russian football in English himself, Alexey Yaroshevsky.
Hi guys, glad to be on, finally, and thanks for the wonderful introduction. I guess I am the voice of Russian football in England and everywhere else.
Pretty much. I think it's mostly yourself and Leonid, but as you've got a first, Yaro, I think you could definitely claim that title. So, Yaro, for those out there who live under a rock and probably may not know, could you do a quick introduction of yourself and discuss maybe what some of the work that you're known for in Russian football?
Well, I would say primarily I am known in Russian football for doing a couple of things in relation to English football. When Loko purchased the rights for the English Premiership, we did a couple of really good projects, and after that, I sort of integrated into the football life here, although it's always been my passion, my dream to work in football. And then I suddenly got a call from Leonid, not the one you mentioned earlier, but the other Leonid, who's now working as a social media manager for Dynamo Moscow. Back at the time, he worked at the Russian Premier League, and he asked me to commentate on a game of the Russian Premier League in English for the global audience. And I first thought it was some sort of experiment, and indeed it was. And ever since then, I kind of made history in that respect because I was the first commentator of the Russian Premier League in English. It wasn't actually a Dynamo Spartak game last season. And ever since then, I've been doing that just every week, sometimes 2 games in a week, sometimes even 3 games in a week, along with a couple of my colleagues. It's not just Leonid, who is otherwise known sometimes as Borat, for his famous shriek at one of the games. It's also Dan Hawkins, my good esteemed colleague, who's also commentating as well. And yeah, it's been great. I've been loving it for the past year or so, doing commentary of the Russian football across the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone who watches the service will agree that it's probably one of the best developments that we've had in terms of keeping up with the matches, the price, and the wide availability. Just really getting the game out there for a lot of people who maybe found it difficult to keep up in the past. So it's definitely been an excellent one. And if we're going to jump straight in to the managerial changes, for those who may not have been aware, but at the weekend, Krasnodar lost 5-0 at home to Akhmat Grozny, and immediately after the match, Murad Musaev resigned from his post as the Krasnodar manager. Now, it's been, in my opinion, a long time coming. It's not particularly surprising. Sergei Galitsky did claim prior that he would support Musaev, even if he lost every game this season, but Musaev has taken the decision out of his hands. He's only got 2 wins from the last 10 games, which was against Tambov and Lokomotiv Tbilisi in a friendly game, and they've actually conceded 14 goals in the last 4 alone. So, Yaro, we've all covered Musaev in depth on RFN, probably too much to be fair in the last couple of months, but as the guest on the pod, what's your thoughts about Musaev leaving? Are you particularly surprised about his departure or not?
No, I'm absolutely not surprised. As you said correctly, it's been a long time coming. I really do feel sorry for him. I actually had a feeling that at some of those games that you mentioned, the last 4, when they conceded an absolute ton of goals, I don't know, it may sound like a conspiracy theory, but I had a feeling that some of the players were just sort of willing to see the back of him, and they were deliberately underperforming. I'm not putting the accusation out there. It's just sort of a feeling that I had. You know, these things happen in football, and we've seen it time to time and again that sometimes players just refuse to play normally for their managers, and eventually they win and managers get the sack. But in this case, I think Musaev may have burnt out himself. I think it's just everything was going wrong. And, you know, to me, Krasnodar being as low as 10th after claiming the historic achievement for themselves, after claiming the much coveted Champions League spot and actually playing decent football as compared to the other Russian clubs during the group stages. After all that, seeing them underperforming so badly, and I've commentated on a few games with them, and it's just I cannot believe my eyes what's happening to them. So I think it's the right move for everyone concerned. I'm pretty sure that Musaev will find a job very soon. He is a very talented manager. He's a young manager. He has a lot to learn. He has a lot to grow, a lot of space for growth. And in the case of Krasnodar appointing Goncharenko, it's also a good move for the parties concerned. Goncharenko was doing a really good job with a very limited amount of resources he's had at CSKA. And now he's probably going to have more resources, but the biggest question, of course, is whether Mr. Galitsky will let him manage or not just be like the usual "I'm the real boss here" kind of attitude, which I've heard about regarding Krasnodar. But I think everyone should be pleased in these circumstances, and I do feel sorry for Murad Musaev on the one hand. On the other hand, I believe he is very much relieved to have a bit of a vacation now before he certainly gets his new job, and I'm sure that there will be clubs after him in the nearest future.
Yeah, from with Musaev from the outside looking in, it really does seem that he's a quiet man. He's quite a mild-mannered man. He's known for his quiet demeanour in his press conferences, and with some of the players, I think you can tell that they perhaps did lose some faith in him, did stop playing to 100% of their ability, whether or not that was intentional or if it's just a lack of faith, which is totally understandable. Now, as you mentioned, Yaro, Goncharenko has came in and signed a 2-year contract to replace Musaev almost immediately after he resigned. David, first, do you think that this is a potentially good move for Goncharenko? I mean, we both went on record recently in saying that we would like to see him in the game, back in the RPL, back in the Russian game pretty soon, but I don't think any of us expected this soon.
Yeah, it's a tough one, that, because this season we've lambasted both Goncharenko and Musaev for their underperformance. They both did underperform this year. Goncharenko maybe the last 2 years struggled, particularly in Europe. But we know he's a good coach. He's done good things at Ufa. He started off really well with CSKA. But you just wonder whether Krasnodar could have been more ambitious. Could they have gone abroad and done something rather than getting someone who is used to how the league works, which is that's a good safe bet, and he's still a young coach. But we know he's not the best coach still. We know he's got his shortcomings, and it disappointed me a little bit. As much as I like Goncharenko, I remember he was struggling with stress and like high blood pressure at CSKA for a bit there. But he's got a big job to do, and we talk about him coping well under CSKA's strict financial restrictions that he had for a few years. But then this summer they had big money, and he did not spend it well. We heard that Gaich was his move rather than coming from the scouting team. He was the one who said, "Yeah, we want to get him," and we all know how that went. So it'd be interesting. We've said a number of times that this is a big summer for Krasnodar. Their squad is not deep enough. We know that obviously Galitsky wants to use the youth team, but without Europe, with Europe and the amount of injuries they had, they got found out pretty quick that relying on that youth team for depth isn't the way. Obviously, they're unlikely to have Europe next season, so they're not going to have the draw of getting players like Kabela or Klaassen or Marcus Berg in this summer. So they're going to have to probably go back to their old strategy of, maybe going back to Scandinavia, signing some young players out of Scandinavia or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I think that'll be more exciting than what we've seen last couple of years, where they've been signing ready-made players like Vilenia, Kabela, Klaassen, etc. because they needed ready-made players to help them be competitive in the Champions League, which they were to a point. And they did get hit with some very bad injury luck over the last couple of seasons. Big injuries to Gazinski and Kabela, Klaassen, etc. So it's going to be an interesting summer. to see how Goncharenko and Krasnodar as a unit decide to rebuild. We know that Berg's going, we know that Vilhena is likely to go. Will players like Cabela want to stay as well? Klaassen is good enough to go and play abroad as well, so it'll be interesting. But mixed opinions on his appointment from my perspective, I think.
Yeah, I think I agree almost entirely. I am also totally mixed. I rate Goncharenko as a coach, and if you look at his past, his best jobs have been where he has led the rebuild. When he had to rebuild CSKA, who had an aging squad, who needed to rebuild to get back, and he did lead a rebuild very well with the revamping of the squad and bringing in the players that he did, and introducing so much from CSKA's academy. But he only took them to a certain point. I mean, he also led the part of the rebuild, or at least aided in part of the rebuild, and around youth players at Ufa as well, and did an excellent job there. But my reservations is that a lot of the issues that he's going to be facing at Krasnodar were this very similar issues that he had at CSKA previously, where it's a small squad which is generally quite injury prone. They do have some genuine, real good quality in there, but like you said, David, how long is that going to stay around? I mean, Berg's already confirmed. I mean, yes, he's aging a bit, but he's already confirmed to be going back to Sweden, and they're not getting European football next season. But I think they didn't go for a foreign manager, and it's exactly what Yaro said. It's that control that Galitsky exudes over the club and demands. He brings in yes men. Shalimov was a yes man. Kononov too. Musaev owes his entire career to Krasnodar. He's a very talented coach by all accounts, by first-hand accounts as well, of the players who held him in high regard as a coach. But at the end of the day, all of them are yes men to Galitsky to get his way. Now, I think Galitsky, perhaps, without putting words into the man's mouth, could perceive as having a foreign coach as maybe causing a little bit of a problem, like you saw Konstantin, the late great Konstantin Sarsenia, had sometimes, where Vilas Boas and so on were very not anything but yes men. They were very out there, very outgoing, and demanded total control. Goncharenko probably won't necessarily do that, and it was a very similar case under CSKA, where Jinya and Babayev generally ran the club, and the only time recently that Goncharenko himself actually demanded more control was the signing of Gaich, and that didn't exactly go very well. So Yaro, as the last word on Goncharenko and Musaev, do you think that Krasnodar maybe could have replaced or should have replaced Musaev with a foreign coach instead of Goncharenko?
Well, I don't think that's the case, with Krasnodar. I don't think they necessarily were looking for a foreign coach. I'm also not thinking they necessarily looked for another yes man, because that evidently hasn't really worked out for Musaev. And again, listen, we have to be on the inside of the club to understand how things run. We only can assume that Galitsky exerts so much control over what's going on in the dressing room. He obviously exerts control over financial things and how the club is run. But when I asked people at Krasnodar directly, when I asked the players of Krasnodar directly what kind of involvement Mr. Galitsky has at the club, they've all been very coy about that. So I'm only assumed that he has this much power over managers. But with Goncharenko, it just has to be different. We were just been talking about things like that with a bunch of my colleagues as to whether he has any chance of succeeding there. And the only way he can succeed there is if he has his own way, meaning transfers, meaning tactical decisions, and the lesser the influence Galitsky has on the actual game, on the actual playing style, on the actual footballing side of the club, the more chance that we may see, not necessarily a champion Krasnodar, but the team which gets back into at least the top four where they should be, because their position in the table right now is a bit of a disgrace for everyone supporting the club. And it's been a while, although if we say it's been a while in relation to Krasnodar, that's kind of a joke because they've only been in existence for 13 years. But it's been a while, even within their short history, that they've seen such a plight and such a low position in the table. They've used to success. They've just been to the Champions League, and seeing things like that, they can only go upwards from here, because it's already sort of rock bottom for what they've been used to in the last couple of years.
Yeah, hopefully. And knowing a functionary like Galietzky in the way that he works, that he will leave no stone unturned until he can return Krasnodar back to that level. That's just the sort of man Galietzky is. He's incredibly efficient. I mean, the job that he's done at Krasnodar so far to this point is absolutely unbelievable, and we hold him in high regard, and hopefully they can return back up there, and sooner the better as well for both Krasnodar themselves and I think the RPL as a whole. One last word, Yaro.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of build on your thoughts about Galitsky in this respect. He's absolutely driven in terms of making this work, and again, it's all up to him now to prove that he can trust the manager fully in terms of making this work. But you know what I want to see at Krasnodar, and I actually tweeted out, or actually I posted on my Telegram channel a fortnight ago when Goncharenko was appointed, that what I want to see is all the haters of Krasnodar, people sitting in there on their couches and screaming that, this is a multi-million toy of a rich guy who's just playing with football. It's exactly not the case. It's exactly the opposite. He is very emotionally driven when it comes to this club. He invested so much of his own money, of his own emotions into that. And he just has to sort of realize that the manager is the man who takes the team out into the pitch, he motivates them, and he builds the tactics, and he wants certain players to play in his team. And if Galitsky does that, I believe we'll see a totally different Krasnodar next term.
Yeah, hopefully. This private model, I mean, I see that online as well with all the Krasnodar hate, but in my eyes, that's how what the rest of Russian football should be eyeing to move towards, is that private model, that investment that Galitsky provides to Krasnodar is keeping them competing at the highest level. And there's lots of clubs around the country that are desperate to emulate that. David, any last word on Krasnodar, Musaev and Goncharenko?
Yeah, just an open question. So I'm trying to think, do Krasnodar operate with a director of football? Is what's his name? Hashik? Is he the director of football? Or is he just a director somewhere else? Because it's a weird one if they don't operate with one, with all the other clubs sort of are operating now. Like Dinamo have a good one, Zenit obviously have Ribalta. I'm not sure how they operate there.
I don't think Krasnodar have a DOF actually. I think Hashik is just the director. I met him actually a few times. He's a interesting bloke, a rather nice bloke, I should say. But I don't think he runs the sort of transfer business dealings and all other business aspects of the club as a DOF does. I think he's just a sort of figure to take care of administrative stuff within Krasnodar.
I wonder if that's then something that they need to do as a club. We know they're a young, progressive club. I think that's maybe something they need to look at to maybe try and take them to the next level. Like get a good director of football in there, and we know they've got decent money behind them. They could probably attract a decent name in there. We're seeing it work quite well for Dinamo. Spartak have had obviously their ups and downs with their DOFs. They had Zorn obviously doing a decent job and then disappearing, and then they had Gazizov, who obviously had his potential falling out with Fedun. I wonder if that's something they need to do. Is just my last thoughts.
Dave, you know what else they need? You know what else they need? They need me not commentating on their games, because I think that's been the curse of Krasnodar as of late. I think it's only been like 2 times that Krasnodar actually won when I was commentating on their game. And the funny thing is, I was going to commentate the game against Dinamo, the recent one where they were leading 2-0 and lost 3-2. And I was going to that game, and a friend of mine texted me, "So, are you going to drown Krasnodar again this time?" I was like, "Dude, this is not funny. They should win. They really should win this time." And then they lose. So I think that's also the reason why they just went down the drain as of late.
I think I remember you doing both the games against Zenit, the one where Utkin scored that great goal, and then obviously they lost. And I can't remember if you were around back in the one the season before that, where Pereira scored his free kick, and then Rakitsky scored his free kick as well. I think that might have been just before you, but I certainly remember the one where Utkin scored that belter.
Yeah, beautiful goal.
I hadn't realised you were such a bad luck charm for them.
Yeah, so I'm happy to delegate the commentating Krasnodar duties to my colleagues. We have other two commentators, that they can do that. I just don't want to drown them.
Well, yeah, you're all good doing Spartak games at the moment.
Yeah,
Hey,
pretty good.
I was going to say every time Yaro comments on one of our Spartak games with CSKA, I'm sure we lose, but I think that's probably more so Spartak's own fault in the Moscow derby of late rather than yours, Yaro. Elsewhere in the RPL, we've got another managerial resignation. As at the weekend, Dinamo slaughtered Ufa 4-0, and straight after the game, Rashid Rakhimov also resigned after having only taken over from Ufa less than a mere months ago now. The caretaker is Nikolai Safranidi. He's a South Ossetian who actually used to play for Ural and finished his career with Ufa themselves in 2018. Ever since then, he's been a member of the coaching staff. Interestingly, also, Artur Shaibekov is taking on the media duties, and he's he stepped up his role from a regular coach to one of the assistants. He's a former Ufa player and was at their academy in 2014, but he actually retired at a young age. He's just 26 still. Now, it's interesting because his previous role was to work on the functional side of the players and with the GPS data and the analytics. He's also, weirdly enough, the first official FIFA champion in the entirety of Bashkiria. So he's got some experience there as well. But he's actually the son of Rinat Shaibekov, who took over from Shamil Gazizov as general director after the former left last year. Rinat himself was previously an executive director and a loyal ally of Gazizov for a very long time. He's been at Ufa since 2010 and was actually there before Ufa existed. He was one of the men in charge of Bashinformzia's Dinamo, which was the club that succeeded Ufa. But it's just a nice little aside that he's one of the assistants who was previously data analyst and he's the executive director's son. But Alexey Stokalov, the former Velez manager, is heavy favourite to take over, but that is still at this rate just rumours. And today, the FNL confirmed that Stokalov has actually left Velez Moscow. So, to be honest, it seems to be like a when, not if, that Stokalov will potentially take over Ufa. So, David, as the resident RFN Ufa expert, do you think that Stokalov would fit in well there? Or is he maybe better off staying where he is at Velez at the top end of the FNL?
It will certainly be interesting. First half of the season, Velez were getting big plaudits because they were going out there with no fear and just trying to outscore everyone. Obviously, they had Artyom Maximenko, who was on some ridiculous form and got his transfer to Ural. But Velez have been renowned this season for their relatively young squad. A lot of younger players in there, sub 23, sub 24 for most of them. A squad built out of nothing, which would be a good thing for Ufa at least. A lot of these guys and the Velez squad sort of had come out of academies of other teams. Like Maximenko had been barely getting football at Nizhny Novgorod, had been released from Arsenal Tula, and he made him into one of the FNL's best players this season. And then now he's playing in the Premier League. So in that sense, it's a decent potential approval. But the style of football doesn't match up to how Ufa, we all know Ufa are one of the most boring teams, admittedly, as much as I quite enjoy watching them play, and I do like Ufa. They do play some very anti-football stuff. I think if they were going to be compared to any club in the English leagues, you'd be getting your Burnleys and your Boltons and your Stokes out. Yeah, any team coached by Jose Mourinho, yeah, out there to compare. So it'd be interesting to see if Stokalov was to bring that attacking mindset to Ufa and apply that to them from Velez, because Velez after the first half of the season they were sat sixth, fresh after just being promoted from the PFL. It was a good first half of the season, playing fearless football. They did get slaughtered a couple of times against the better teams. They lost heavily to Krylia, like most teams did. But they also had some very good results. Post-winter, without Maximenko, they have struggled. They've dropped well out of the race for the top four, having been just 4 points adrift. I think they're now 8 or 9 points adrift. So, he's struggled this side of the break, but he's a young coach. We know that's what Ufa like to do. So I think there are some aspects where he sort of ticks some boxes, and there are other question marks about him. But it's a young coach at the start of his career, and he's the sort of move you'd expect Ufa to make. Especially if they go down, which it's looking likely they might go down. Maybe they're planning ahead. Maybe they're playing right. If we get Stukalov in, he's the guy who's going to get us promoted straight back next season. So it'd be interesting. It'd be interesting to see what happens if he comes in. I think there's potential. Potentially if they do go down, then his style would certainly suit them. But it'll be strange to see Ufa attacking in the Premier League, but maybe they'll go all guts, no glory for the rest of the season to try and stay up. We'll see.
It would be a nice change from Ufa. I mean, I've always joked myself about Ufa. But don't get me wrong, I love Ufa as a club and how they operate. I always harken back to an article you wrote, David, for the site a couple of years back, where I think your headline was Ufa, how to run a small club in Russia, and it literally just hits the nail on the head. If you are the owner or a functionary at a relatively small new club like Ufa, follow their model. It's absolutely perfect in not just getting through the leagues, but also long-term sustainability. And I think that's perhaps what they have in mind here as well. Of course, I mean, Stukalov could make a short-term impact if he does brilliant for the club. But long-term, this is definitely a very sensible option for whatever league Ufa remain in next season. If they do fall down drop down to the Finna L, then he's already dragged a privately owned, relatively new, successful club up to that level of near the top of the Finna L. Why couldn't he do it again next season with Ufa if that is the case? That has to happen. Yaro, what do you think about Stukalov and the general resignation of Rakhimov? I don't think that Rakhimov's resignation was really that surprising if you look at the results.
Well, I think Rakhimov just jumped at an opportunity to work somewhere. I mean, he's been without a job for a while, and the opportunity came knocking on his door, and why not? I would say his job was an uphill ride from the very beginning, because Ufa's problems have been quite severe ever since the start of the season. I think they should not have sacked Vadim Yevseyev. They should have given him more time. I think he was doing a really good job, in the club. And you always have those spells where your club is underperforming, where you think you have lost a sense of direction, where, something new is needed. But overall, just before that, don't forget Ufa was pretty much in the top part of the table not so long ago. Ufa played some really interesting football. Ufa had really good players. Let's not forget where Mr. Zinchenko comes from, and multiple champion of England and about to become another time champion of England, this term with Manchester City. That was all Ufa just not so long ago. This season they just fell off the cliff, and I assume, again, I'm not really well versed into the inner dealings of the club. It has a lot to do with Gazizov's departure, a very unsuccessful departure to Spartak Moscow a season ago.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now he's back, and we see all these changes, happening. I'm not talking about Rakhimov's resignation. I think it was pretty obvious that he would not last in this job. But I'm talking about everything else. And even if they go for Stukalov, I can't say I'm too familiar with his playing style. I think I've only seen Velis playing like once this season. Sorry, just not too much time I have available for watching the lower leagues. But in any case, he is considered quite a promising guy, and as you said, working with a privately owned club with very low resources, taking them very high in the second tiers, a good achievement as it is. So if there is some kind of plan moving forward, I think they are pretty much ready for relegation. There are very small chances of Ufa staying up. At the very best that that can happen to them is they make the playoff for the final relegation spot against either Rotor or Ural. It's not going to be Tambov in any case, and we all know that. But I do believe that there is an understanding among Ufa that whoever comes in now must brace himself for potentially clawing their way back into the Premier League next season. And I think Ufa have everything they need to do that, especially if Gazizov is as active as rumors are there. Rumors are out there in terms of running things again with the club.
Yeah, certainly. Gazizov himself has confirmed in a recent interview that he will be taking over as general director, but will also be working alongside Shaibekov, who will remain as general director until the end of the season. So I'm not quite sure how that dynamic works, but it's inevitable that Kazizov will basically get back in charge again, and Shaibekov is a very loyal friend and ally of his anyway. David, what do you think's where Ufa's problems lie this season, and why are they struggling so much as opposed to last? Is it potentially an add-on effect of transfers and COVID and everything that's going on in the world right now?
I think Yaro had it with the loss of Gazizov was huge. Obviously, we know that we read comments and quotes from Ufa that they did struggle with the pandemic. They lost a lot of money. As a small club who depend on things like match day income and things like that. They struggled. So then when they lost Gazizov, they lost Fomin, they lost Urunov in the summer, and they had no money to replace those three guys. And those three guys were key on and off the pitch to Ufa's strategy. And we see how good Fomin's been back at Dinamo. Urunov, I think, just made the move too soon. Obviously, he's come back to Ufa, and in a struggling team has been very disappointing. And I think it was just that they had so little wiggle room. They just were looking to survive. They brought in players on frees from all over Europe, Croatians, Bosnians, Serbians, just guys who are so anti their normal remit of signing players like Zinchenko, like Obliakov, who they brought out of the Zenit Academy, and guys like that. They were used to signing younger guys and turning around. Fomin being another great example. Signed out of the Feniel. And they didn't have a chance to do that. They just had to rely on free agents and loans, and they couldn't build a squad which is good enough. Ultimately, there's some good individual talents there in the squad, but it isn't good enough. And we finally saw them in the winter. Finally, maybe start to get some spending going again. They brought in the Norwegian guy Bizoza, which is sort of back into their remit of signing some younger players from abroad. You have to wonder if they're relegated. Would he stick around? Potentially not. So yeah, I think it was all just related to those departures and COVID. They were limited to what they could do. And I agree with Yaro as well about Yevseev. I really liked Yevseev. There was even rumours that he could have gone back to Ufa there as well, which we may well yet see. I liked him there. He was an interesting character, that's for sure. But I thought he was doing a decent job before he was sacked. So yeah, I think just some bad luck and lack of money, it seemed to me, was what caused them to struggle so much.
Yeah, it seems COVID really had a difficult effect as well on them, with all that money that they got for those transfers just going straight into trying to keep the club alive. Now, we did ask earlier this morning before we recorded the pod for any of your questions, the listener questions for Yaro, and Frederick Brockhart came back with one and asked Yaro what your opinion is on Olic at CSKA, and how did CSKA play in Olic's first game in that win over Tambov at the weekend, Yaro?
Well, to me, it's kind of a very, I wouldn't say weird one in the circumstances, but some of the former pros of both CSKA and Spartak and actually Dinamo as well that I've spoken with about Olic, and ever since he's been appointed, they all say in one voice that it's a bit of a weird one, considering that Olic, yes, he may be sort of a footballing legend of CSKA and one of the best players from outside of Russia to ever represent the club, and the supporters love him so much, but managerially, he's barely had any experience at all. I mean, assistant manager of the Croatian national team, no matter how good that team was and no matter how far it got with Olic being the assistant manager, it's still maybe not enough for a club like CSKA, for a club with ambitions like CSKA have, for a club which is not necessarily in peril, but clearly a very roller coaster season for them. There were times when they were first in the table. Now they are, trying to stay alive in the top four and things like that. So I'm divided about Olic yet. The two games that I've seen so far, which is the one in the league and the one in the cup, both games didn't really feel like, the new manager syndrome, when a team is playing very average football and then the new manager comes in and then the team starts winning. It often happens in the world of football, but this is not the case. I mean, they won both games, but they didn't look, super comfortable. And come on, they played against Tambov. Everyone beats Tambov now. I mean, dropping points against Tambov at this rate must be considered something of an abuse. It must be offensive because they're just so bad. I feel very bad for them. I mean, it's not their problem. It's the problem of the people running that club, that they led them to such a financial abyss. But at the end of the day, a 2-1 win against Tambov with 4 penalties in the game, that's not something that would give you like wings of confidence and would tell you, okay, Olic is landed and he will lead us to glory. We'll see, of course, but for now, it's still a very sort of open book for me when it comes to Olic and his chances at CSKA.
Yeah, it's a good thing that Rubin have already played Tambov in the allocated league games this season, because I think they, with how they play against smaller teams compared to how they play against big teams, would potentially drop points. So wasn't it, David, that Rubin drew with Tambov in a friendly game not that long ago during the international break, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'd rather not talk about that, to be honest.
That's fair enough. But anyway, we'll move on. And that ends our little segment on the sort of managerial incomings and outgoings in the RPL over the last couple of weeks or so. I know Olic wasn't quite as new, but it was CSKA and the Olic move that started off this little bit of a merry-go-round. And another request we had from on the Twitter was from Tom Bowdry, and that was to ask Alexey about whether or not Spartak are in a title race this year. So Yaro, you commentated on the Rostov Spartak game at the weekend. Do you think Spartak could be in a title race, or is that defense maybe not quite good enough to keep up with Zenit?
Well, I would say hell yeah, they are in a title race, and finally we have a title race, which is great. It could be any other team in Spartak's place. I mean, after this coming weekend, it can be Lokomotiv in their place. But it largely depends on Zenit now. I think it's theirs to lose in many ways. Of course, Spartak is the kind of team that can always find a mine away from the minefield. They can stumble. Of course, I'm not talking about that loss against Rubin, Dave. No. Rubin were absolutely majestic in that game, and they deserved the win and all that kind of stuff. But Spartak dropped points in unexpected places all throughout the season as well. They've been also very unstable. Had there been slightly more, prolific or professional in the away game against Zenit before the winter break, we could have had a proper title race on our hands now. But they absolutely collapsed in that match, and even with the help from Dejan Lovren, they still couldn't, get at least a point in St. Petersburg. But no, I believe they are firmly in the title race. And you remember what I said about me commentating on the Krasnodar games? Well, it's the other way around with Spartak these days. Like every match I commentate with the Red and Whites, they keep winning. And this weekend I'm commentating on the Moscow derby between Loko and Spartak. So I'm very much excited to see what happens there, because both Lokomotiv and Spartak have been very impressive of late. And I'm really happy for probably the first time in 3 seasons that we do have a proper title race with, it can actually go down to the wire, to the last game week of the championship to decide who is the winner.
Hopefully, that's what I'm really excited about this year. I mean, Yaro, if that's true, when you commentate and Spartak always win, then I think I'm going to have to lock you to the outside of the Otkritia at some point this season. But I will provide a guitar and a bottle of vodka, Denis Glushakov 2017 style at the very least. So
nice.
While on the Spartak topic, how do you think Promes has played since his return from Holland?
Well, it looks like he just is living a second life. He's just lost most of the stuff that he's had in the last couple of seasons. He admitted openly that his move to Seville was a mistake. He was forced to play almost like a defender at that team. At Ajax, it didn't really work out for him either. I mean, but Ajax is the biggest talent generator probably in Europe, and it's really hard to fit in that team where so many youngsters are showing their magic. But now he just returned and he's on fire. He's either scoring or assisting in just about every game since he's been coming on. You can also tell by I'm not a body language expert, but you can also tell by his emotions and the way he reacts to stuff on the pitch that he's where he's belong. He just has to be here. It's his team and his championship, and I'm really hopeful that Ajax and Spartak will come to an agreement to make this deal permanent at the end of the season. Also, again, I'm not a Spartak Moscow fan. I'm just seeing how this works out for the club, how this works out for the fans, and trust me, when he's returned, we see a total different Spartak. Many of my colleagues in the Russian press, they've said that Promes is exactly what Spartak have been missing in terms of attacking play. Maybe a few more things they've missed as well, but definitely Promes makes them stronger, makes them better, and maybe partly because he's back, we are having a title race.
I think so. I think Promes is, when he was here last time, was the life of that team. He was the core of that Carrera team, which was so effective. When he was gone, Spartak really just missed that sort of star player, that creative force that they could pull the whole club around, and that's something that Spartak really needs. They need charismatic figures to direct that club in the correct direction. The size of the club, the fan base of the club, you need something to grab a hold onto. So I'm optimistic. I'm really glad Promes is back, and I'm even more glad that he's returned to his old ways. David, it's time for Rubin Corner.
Okay, straight into it. I just want to add, I always thought you were a Spartak fan, Yaro. So that was an interesting revelation there. I don't know why. I just always thought you were a Spartak fan. But yeah, Rubin, that was an important win. It was an important win we had last weekend against Sochi. It's the kind of game I was expecting us to lose in our running. We got a pretty tough running with Sochi, Rostov, Krasnodar as some of our opponents, and they're all our competitors as we're going for the top 5. So yeah, good win, very good win in the circumstances. We're still missing Huang in midfield, which is a big loss. Although it's back in training now, but we can always rely on one man at the moment. The man of the moment, obviously, the boy Kvicha. Scored a worldie. It's just his reputation keeps on growing at the moment, and it's so nice to see him get some recognition outside of Russia in recent weeks. So yeah,
Dave,
big
Dave,
win.
do you know that I always mention you whenever I commentate on the Rubin games as the biggest Kvicha fan out there?
I do.
Outside of Russia and Georgia.
Oh yeah, the Georgians, man, they love him. They love him so much. And so do I, to be fair. It's so nice, to have watched him this season. And I've always had that doubt, was is he just good because he's playing in Russia? Is he just good because he's playing for my team and I think he's good? And then to see him go out against Spain and play the way he did against Spain, that was him saying to us, I can do this at another level. So yeah, I think that was the thing that really finally made me think, wow, we've got a serious player here in Russia. So yeah, big win for us. We've currently got 40 points in the league, Rubin, which is our highest total for the last 5 years. And there's still 6 games left to play. So we're having a very good season here under Slutsky. He's doing a great job. Hopefully we can somehow snag maybe 5th spot and sneak into Europe. It would be amazing if we could get European football. After the last few years, it's not something I was expecting, but the fact they're actually in there in that amazing race for Europe that there is this season, with those 6 teams vying for it, it's just nice to be in the mix again.
On Rubin, quickly, I don't discuss Rubin much, but I had a few beers at the weekend for Easter, and I found my notes, because I type up some notes when I watch the games on YouTube to look back at for the podcast and so on. And I've literally only got 3 bullet points for Rubin Sochi, and it's Rubin bad, Chupin good, Kvicha great. So I think that, to be honest, when I watched the game back again in a more sober state, it literally, drunk me knows what he's talking about, because it's Sochi were really good, but Chupin kept your guys in it until Kvicha's wonder strike.
Well, Kvicha didn't even start. That was it. We played the whole first half without him. I think presumably because he played, so a lot of football over the international break. And that first half, we had Kostyukov out there on the left wing, and it was just an unbelievable world of difference when they subbed him at half time. It was ridiculous. Just that directness that you get from him, just always makes that a game so exciting to watch when you're watching him. So big win against Sochi there, and hopefully we can go do it with some of these fixtures. We got a nice little. Our last two fixtures are Arsenal and Rotor, which are nice and easy ones. A bit like Zenit, actually. I just noticed that Zenit's last two fixtures are Rotor and Ufa, I think. So if Zenit are going to... No, Ufa and Tambovs are even easier. And they have got to play Rotor as well. So if Zenit are going to drop points, it's got to happen soon because they've got a very easy last three fixtures there. So it's going to be a very, very good end to the season here. Like the best for years, surely.
Definitely in the race for Europe just outside. Now, in that race for Europe, there's 5 points currently that separate third from ninth. The one team, though, that really sort of stand out for me in recent times, and especially since the return after the winter break, is Lokomotiv, and how Nikolic has got them operating in this all season, to be fair, in those couple of games in Europe where they put in some brilliant defensive performances at the start of the season, but particularly after his tactical change, going with the big man, little man up top, and he's really bringing the best out of some unheralded players. I mean, Ade actually looks like a footballer for the first time since he moved to Loko. Yaro, what are your thoughts of Nikolic this season? Are you being enthused by the Serbs' work over in Moscow?
Well, absolutely, and I might only disagree with you about Eder. I think he is still as wooden as he was 2 years ago. The man is an enigma to me, complete enigma. How on earth can he score the most important goals in the history of whatever Portugal national team and Lokomotiv for that matter, and then just for the rest of the time he's absolute nothing on the pitch. It's just mind-boggling to me. But anyway, he's a hero of the moment, and let's appreciate him for that. But back to Lokomotiv, after the winter break, they've been absolutely different, unstoppable. I just commentated on their cup game against Sochi, and the way they played, they gave the ball to Sochi maybe too much in the first half, but they just needed this one chance. 44 minutes into the game, where Smolov just bounced on it. Boom, there we have a goal. And the second half, pretty much the same. They give the ball away, they let them control the ball, and then they just strike. Boom, 2-0. And Sochi are demoralized, they're man down. And that's been the style of Lokomotiv ever since the post-winter restart. The same story pretty much in the game against Arsenal, where Arsenal were just, banging on their door for 70 minutes, and then Lokomotiv somehow emerged 3-0 winners because they just activated some superpowers in the last 20 minutes of the game. And one of those superpowers was, of course, Smolov, who is, I would say, back to his best now. And that's good news for not only for just Lokomotiv, but for the Russian national team as well. Both of his goals in the cup were absolute bangers. But anyway, speaking about Nikolic, there's only one thing that annoys me a little bit, and those are a couple of friends of mine, Lokomotiv fans, who were firmly in the Nikolic out camp just before the winter break. If you remember, Lokomotiv lost heavily against Krasnodar, and they was on a pretty bad run of form before the winter break. And we had this long conversation with my diehard Lokomotiv supporting friends, and I told them give him some time, guys. He's not even a full season in. He led you to Europe, not just to Europe, to second place finish, the Champions League last season. Not against all odds, but the situation in Lokomotiv was very toxic after Sermon's departure and all that. So just give him some time, and then we see bang, after the winter break, Lokomotiv comes back in a absolutely different form. As you've said correctly, some of the players are given much more game time. They have much more trust from Nikolic. Mukhin started playing a lot of games, which is really good, and I think he's a very talented young man. The masterstroke of signing Pablo from Bordeaux, you see how great he's been. Lokomotiv is barely conceding any goals at all. But I do believe the real test for them will happen this weekend, because Spartak, who've also had a resurgence of form, not as good as Lokomotiv after the winter break, but I would argue that Spartak probably had a little more difficult opposition than Lokomotiv on their way. The resurgence of form has been fantastic, and it's really fun to watch them. They do play some really good football. They play cautious football sometimes, but then they always find the space to punish the opposition for it. and their run speaks for itself. Was it 5 games won on the trot since the post-winter break? And now I have the golden opportunity to rub it in the faces of my local supporting friends, saying, "I told you so, guys. You just had to give him time." But obviously, these guys are annoying right now because they think they're going to be champions of Russia now. So it's the circle of annoyance when it comes to my communication with my local supporting friends. But I'm really happy to see Lokomotiv playing much better. I'm really happy to see Nikolic proving a lot of doubters wrong, and long may it continue.
Yeah, I think we can relate with the Loko fans going from one extreme to the other. Ilya, I know you're
Dude, they're
listening
so
out there.
annoying sometimes. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, I get it all the time. I mean, that's my own fault with Spartak. We're just constantly depressed. But one last little thing on the RPL today before we do move on to the rest of the Twitter questions to finish off. A certain Javier Ribalta actually left Zenit. He was, of course, the director of football and has been instrumental in the last couple of years about Zenit's return to the top of the RPL. And we've worked with him previously ourselves and had the odd contact with him. And he's been nothing but very welcoming, polite, brilliant, interesting, and done a great job at Zenit. There's rumours that he could be off to Eintracht Frankfurt, and other rumours that he will basically end up at a club in Europe somewhere. So all the best to him, and also rumoured that a certain Andrei Arshavin could be replacing him in the big job at Zenit as well. So definitely want to look out for in the future, and I think we will cover that in a future episode in lieu of trying to fit everybody's Twitter questions in. So Yaro, the first one that we got that we haven't mentioned already was from Ben at the Ben Zenit. And he asked, for the YouTube match commentary, will there potentially be 2 commentators instead of just one per match in the future? Is that anything you may be allowed to answer?
No, I'm allowed to answer everything. I'm not in handcuffs or anything like that. Our job is very sort of open and transparent at the Russian Premier League. Well, the sort of news I have for now is that I spoke to one of the coordinators last week, and it seems that the English commentary will continue into next season, which is great news, I believe, to those watching Russian football outside. It's personally great news for me, obviously, because I love this job. As for the 2 commentators, I cannot say whether that will happen. I mean, technically, it is possible because there's enough space in the studios that we're doing our commentary from. There's enough equipment, so that shouldn't be a problem. I would say probably the only obstacle on the way to having 2 commentators commentate at the same time is there's not too many of us. It's only just 3 of us for now. There might be some more people coming in, but that's not my decision to make. Whether there would be any more spare hands and we can do a dual commentary, that would be great. I even suggested to the guys at RPL maybe at some point we should commentate straight from the stadiums, like the big boys at Match do. But that might be running into some technical difficulties. I mean, setting up the broadcast from there and all that. But listen, just 18 months ago, there was no English commentary at all. The fact is that the Russian Premier League are trying to change things. They are moving forward. They are trying to introduce something new. There was a point when we even did like sort of little online teasers for the game, for big games coming up. I hope that those things will return for next season. There is a certain degree of willingness to progress, to change things, to make it a little more flashy. So I'm hoping maybe the dual commentary is somewhere down the list of those things to be introduced next season, but we'll see about that.
Hopefully. I think it is brilliant, really, the coverage that they do, considering it's £5 a month for the upper end subscription fee. You can't beat that. But we also had a question from Chris Holly. That's at Chris Holly EFC. What's been the most bizarre thing you've ever witnessed at a game, on or off the pitch? Or potentially, what's the most memorable goal you've witnessed in the RPL?
Well, listen, when it comes to bizarre things related to Russian football, it's the banter league of the world. There are so many bizarre things that if I start talking about them, we might go for another hour at least. But listen, guys, you did a thread with the most bizarre happenings on and off the pitch in the Russian league. So, the person who asked that question can actually go and see that thread and enjoy it and laugh his or her head off. But when it comes to like the more recent things, I would say probably there's a strong competition between Dejan Lovren's own goal against Spartak Moscow. I think that was pretty bizarre because I was commentating on that game and I couldn't describe what happened because I was dumbfounded for the first time in a very long time. And the second one, the more recent one, Nikola Vlasic shooting a corner against the corner flag, which even made the 4-3-3 headlines. I was quite surprised when I heard my voice on 4-3-3, which is, I've been there before, but like, whoa, what's going on here? Yeah, that was quite bizarre. And talking about goals, well, in the recent history, if we're talking about the Russian Premier League, in my personal chart of crazy goals, nothing beats Eric Bigfalvi and his shot against Dinamo. I mean, that goal is just an absolute killer. Yeah. I can watch it forever. It's literally my favorite goal ever in the Russian Premier League. The screamer by Daniil Utkin against Zenit, largely irrelevant in the context of the game and the final result, still was a very beautiful goal to observe. Well, I think that should be it. But there are obviously many goals scored, beautiful goals. Jordan Larson scored an absolute beauty recently, so there are plenty of goals. I do the highlights every game week, and sometimes just my jaw is on the floor as how beautiful those goals are. Considering everyone says how average the Russian league is, we sometimes see like beautiful goals and saves, and that's always fun to watch.
I think in terms of bizarre, I'm jealous of anyone who was at the Luch game for when the Luch fan threw the rooster off Alexander Gregorian. And
I remember that one.
I would love to see what went on after that and how they got that chicken or rooster, whatever it is, away from the pitch. But anyway, I digress once again. We've got a question from a certain Andrew Flint. I don't know if I recognise that name, Andrew Flint, but
I know that guy.
Anyway, Andrew's asked, "Have you?" Yeah, of course, Andrew. Good man, Andrew. I'm glad you're listening again. But how excited have you been to be part of the RPL's drive to improve YouTube broadcast in English language comms? I kind of answered that one already, but how much potential do you see the league in having reaching a global audience? Now, I personally think they're going down the right route in that terms of the YouTube route at first to get in the interest at the low entry fee price. But I don't know, what do you think, Yaro, about the route that they're taking to do it?
No, I know critics, I know people who say that, the Russian Premier League should have done better in the last 5 to 10 years, that there were some very lucrative, possibilities and opportunities to expand, to be more, to cover more ground across the world in terms of the coverage and all that. Of course, if you look at the inner managerial structure of the Russian Premier League, of course, we know that, pretty much the same people are at the top of the pyramid, but there's been so many changes internally from, PR managers, social media managers, these people just keep changing and changing and changing, and new people come in with new ideas and things like that. And basically that's how my work for the Russian Premier League materialized, and I hope it stays that way. But overall, I agree with you. I think the decision to do it on YouTube was a very correct one. First of all, because it's very easily accessible. The price, if we are talking about, as we Russians say, the Western world, although I don't really like that cliche, the price is just laughable. When I just started doing this, I had a girl from Austria texting me, DMing me on Twitter saying, every time I go to work, I pay a toll on my road of like €3 per ride. And here I pay like $2 or $5 for a month. So it's literally nothing. So I think that direction was a very correct one on behalf of the Russian Premier League to do the YouTube. It's first of all because of the accessibility. But relating to the first part of the question of how excited I was, man, I wouldn't say I was shaking, but I was nervous for the first time in a very long time, because I've been doing television work for 2 decades now, and very few things made me nervous over this period. But here I'm sitting in that tiny booth at Ostankino, the TV center in Moscow, and I'm thinking to myself, it might be the first time I actually make history. So there's a huge responsibility on my shoulders, and I have to be very concise. I literally prepared for the whole night before that. And considering this was my I wouldn't say first experiment with commentating. I've commentated before, but those were live games on the pitches and things like that. But this was the first sort of broadcasting way of commentating on a game. And I felt really nervous, but at the same time, I felt, great because I was taking a small step for the Russian Premier League, but maybe the huge step for Russian football in general at the time. And I'm really happy that this thing goes on, that this thing continues. And I'm even more happy that it's probably going to continue into the next season, because honestly, guys, when I walk into the booth, no matter who plays, whether it's Akhmat against CSKA or Ufa against Rotor Volgograd, I don't care. Yeah, I just love it. It's a great gig to have.
Yeah, that's awesome. You could tell as well the enthusiasm really does shine through on the comms in particular as well. It's pretty cool, and I'm glad it's going so well, because I've been watching not just the RPL but the Russian league in general for 15 years now, and I remember the olden days of trying to hunt down a Russian VPN or any sort of dodgy, weird stream from the back end of nowhere that you've never been on your life, and every other second you're getting a dodgy virus pop up. So because there's so little on TV in the UK, so it's really changed the game for not just fans of Russian football, as I think we would all attest to, but particularly for us, in our quite unique position of covering Russian football as well as being fans. It's really opened it up, and you can see in the last couple of years, with the World Cup as well, of course, helping the way that the league is growing, at least from a marketing point of view, from even the work that Spartak are doing on Twitter. I get in group chats of Sunderland fans who couldn't care less about Russian football, to be frank, like sharing Kavicha's goal, sharing Spartak's tweets, and I'm like, this is weird and cool and awesome. Why do you care about this when you usually wouldn't? But we have another one from Dave Dano. Dave, the man behind the FC Zenit in Mauritius Twitter account, of course. And Dave's asked, as a native, what makes you the most proud about the domestic league? And what have you in particular seen improve in the last decade the most?
Well, what makes me proud of the domestic league is that it's a one of a kind in the world, should I say, because of the banter. You would never get such crazy things happening in England or in Spain or in Italy, to the point that those leagues, of course, they may be much more entertaining in terms of football. Although I would argue about some of the games in England as to compare to some of the games in Russia, or in Spain or in Italy. But, you will never have so much crazy roller coaster stuff, scandals, fights between managers, suspensions, different kind of sort of non-football stuff happening anywhere else but Russia. I wouldn't say it makes me proud. Some of those things are pretty dark, and maybe they have no place in football in general. And maybe some of those things actually diminish the credibility of Russian league in the eyes of many Russian domestic fans. But it kind of makes me proud that it's a unique league of its own. And the other thing that makes me kind of proud of it is that it's becoming unpredictable. If it was a one-way traffic for Zenit for the last couple of seasons, and before that it was just heavy one-way traffic for Spartak throughout the 90s, the champion changes from time to time. The title race is back on, at least this year. The teams are growing in quality overall. Of course, there are things like Tambov. There are things like Tosna back in the day, right? When they won the cup and got basically bankrupt in the same week. But still, the quality is growing, and considering that I'm doing the highlights of every game week and I have the opportunity to see all of the games, maybe in a congested form, but still all of the games of every game week, I can say the quality has improved so much. So maybe that's the answer to the question about the last 10 years. Certainly, it's hard to keep up with the big money leagues like Germany, like France, like England, of course, like Spain and Italy. Russia is now, I think it's 8th in Europe in terms of everything. But it's not as bad as people think it is here, because I've been hearing a lot from Russians like, we would never want to watch that. I'm like, guys, it's a normal league. It has an intrigue. It has all the pace. It has the goals. It has the saves. And what if people in England watch it? Why do you not want to watch it? But then I go to the stadium and I see, even during the pandemic, thousands of people in the stands, and that kind of warms my heart because of all the times that we're going through, and even 1,000 fans in the stands would be 1,000 more than there are at the English grounds at this moment in time. So unpredictability, banter about it, non-stop banter about the league, and maybe also the fact that it's undervalued by most of the fans domestically. That kind of keeps my interest to Russian league alive, and I think it will only get better over years.
As an English football fan, I can certainly say I am jealous of those who can get into stadiums in Russia at the minute, because I would love nothing more than to go back to a football match, to be quite honest. But I mean, it's the unpredictability is just really. I mean, it's very Russian. I mean, we've all been on the Moscow ring road or on one of the third ring road, say for example, and your taxi driver suddenly just does a U-turn going like 70 down the motorway, and drives crazily the wrong way. I mean, it's just one of those very Russian things that you kind of see every time we're over there. We've got another question from Damo Stone. And what's for you, Yaro, has been the biggest surprise of the season so far?
Well, I would say I've had two big surprises this season. First is Krasnodar, as to how bad they've been and how low they are in the table. That's probably the biggest surprise. And the other big and pleasant surprise, I think it's Khimki, because everyone at the beginning of the season was saying that Khimki have got into the league and they are already doomed. They have no chance of, getting anywhere past the 14th or the 13th. And then, boom, they went on a run of many games without a loss, many games unbeaten. And I think they've only been stopped by Zenit last weekend. And actually, I've watched most of that game. There were certain spells when they played better than Zenit. And they deserved maybe a little more than 0 points from that game. So those are my two big surprises. Players-wise, I think it's Zakharyan of Dynamo Moscow, 17 years of age, and he's absolutely killing it right now. I commentated on a Dynamo game today in a cup, and needless to say, just how badly they missed a teenager. How crazy does it sound? A famed club with millions in budget and a German manager who worked with Jurgen Klopp. They are missing a 17-year-old guy in their attack. So, yeah, those are probably my biggest surprises this season, both negative and positive.
Yeah, I was looking through my notes again today, and for Dynamo, I've got literally Lesovoy, wonderful goal. Youngsters paying off, just Zakharyan, Gruliov, Lesovoy, Chukavin, just how the faith that Schwarz has shown in them, it's really good to see for Dynamo that it's paying off to such a good extent, because they are what are making Dynamo tick right now. The Lesovoy's goal, the ball into him, I think it was Chukavin who played it in, and the run and finish was absolutely brilliant. Zakharyan and Chukavin's was a little bit of luck here and there, but the way that they've been playing, they're really creating their own luck. And Yaro, I thought I would leave perhaps the best till last. It's certainly the one that's Liverpool and Russian football related, so it's right in your wheelhouse. But it's from @Rus1993, and it's Vadim Rossi. Which Russian player would you like to see playing for Liverpool?
Well, that's a good one. If we are looking at the Russian Premier League right now, the only player I would see playing for Liverpool in terms of the quality, I'm very sorry, Dave. That would be Khvicha Kvaratskhelia, of course, because I'm just amazed at at his quality, at his dribbling, and everything. It's a full package, even in such a young age that he is. But he's not Russian, of course. He's Georgian. But if we talk about Russian, if he continues this rate of progression, the aforementioned boy Zakharyan of Dynamo Moscow, by the age of 19 or 20, he could be the one, because I'm absolutely blown away by the size of his testicles. 17 years of age, he's playing first team football and decisive kind of contributions to his team. In the two previous games, if it wasn't for Zakharyan, the result could have been very, very much different. But again, we do have this sort of notion in Russia these days that you cannot say too many good things about a player. He immediately starts underperforming. look at Matvey Safonov. Everybody's been raving about him, and then a very serious slump in form in a very wrong time as well, and then injuries and things like that. So I don't want to heap too much praise upon Zakharyan. I don't see any like sort of senior players in Russia right now being good enough for Liverpool at this stage. Although Liverpool has been so dire this season that it's, you know, maybe even a Russian would not harm at this stage. But if I am to choose a senior player for Liverpool, I don't know. Maybe Smolov could be a backup striker. I mean, the guy can do stuff. He's got experience, so yeah, maybe that.
Not even Golovin?
No, Golovin, you know, he's a good player, but he's a midfielder, and who would you replace in Liverpool's midfield, you know? Because you can fluctuate with the likes of Firmino and Jota and, you know, Salah and Mane. Mane has actually been very poor as of late. And you can slide someone in there, but, you know, the midfield area where Golovin plays, hard to see anyone leave there among the current Liverpool squad.
It's fair. It's fair.
See, when I first saw the question, I mean, the way that Trent Alexander-Arnold's been playing of late, I think, I mean, he plays for Finland, but he was born in Leningrad and he's still at Lokomotiv, but even Boris Rotenberg Jr. could do a job at right back for Liverpool right now.
That's a good joke.
But... Now, and with that, we've reached the end of this week's pod. Yaro, where can everybody find yourself and your work online and anywhere else that you may appear?
Well, I've got lots of places where you can find me. Obviously, the broadcasts of the Russian Premier League on Russian Premier League's YouTube every weekend. Next up for me is, as I've mentioned, Lokomotiv against Spartak, and I will actually give you a little bit of a commercial taina, as we say in Russia. So I will also commentate on, guess what, Krasnodar Zenit. Poor Krasnodar, they're doomed. I will also commentate on Sochi CSKA, and then I will commentate on Spartak CSKA derby this month. So I have the full lineup for this month. And also my Twitter, Yaro LFC, and also for those speaking Russian, I do a YouTube channel about the different dialects and accents of English called Speak Easy. So those are the places you can find me if you are interested.
And for those who may have missed it as well, David, you recorded a short video on the goings on in the RPL for our friends at the Sweeper Pod. They are a podcast to explore all things on a more European football basis, and they are getting experts from certain countries to focus exclusively on their own area of expertise. And the Sweeper Pod in general does focus more towards away from the top 5 leagues and some of the more unheralded leagues that, say, Russia might be held in that similar esteem. And you can find them at the Sweeper Pod on Twitter, and David's very own video is on our own. We've retweeted that on Rus Football News. In another website update, there's a light in the end of the tunnel, and I hope we can revert back to normal operation as soon as possible. We'll be back at the usual time next week. Until then, this has been the RFN Podcast. Goodbye for now.
Идет футбольный матч, летит над полем мяч. Веди его, беги, точнее его ударь. Но мяч берет с ноги решительный вратарь. Не напрасно футбольное поле самых ловких и смелых влечет. Здесь нужны тренировка и воля, быстрота, увлечение, расчет.